Pursuant to House Resolution 83, the concurrent resolution is considered read. The bill shall be debated for 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Financial Services of their respective designees. The gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. McHenry, and the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Waters, each will control 30 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. McHenry.
I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and submit extraneous materials on the bill under consideration.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, this resolution is a simple one. It states that the Congress denounces socialism in all its forms and opposes the implementation of socialist policies in the United States of America. It's a statement that I would hope all elected leaders in the United States could support. Despite my Democratic colleagues' claims, there's nothing in this resolution about entitlement programs or banning social services or anything of the like. In fact, I would encourage anyone who has doubts to actually go and read the resolution. It won't take long. It outlines the pain and hardship experienced by millions around the world who have suffered under a socialist regime. This is something the sponsor of the resolution, Mrs. Salazar of Florida, can speak to personally. Congresswoman Salazar is the daughter of Cuban exiles and was born in Miami's Little Havana. HCON Resolution 9 is not just messaging or a waste of time, as some of my colleagues across the aisle said. It speaks to people who've known all too well the atrocities of socialism, and it gives voice to their pain. I want to thank Congresswoman Salazar for her work on this resolution, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to oppose H.R. Res. 9, Congressional Resolution 9, and yield myself such time as I may consume. Mr. Speaker, yesterday in the Committee on Financial Services, we organized and considered the committee's oversight plan. We debated homelessness and the lack of affordable housing, how to best protect consumers, and the need to strengthen diversity and inclusion across the financial services industry. We also discussed the threat to our nation's future if our country is forced to default on our debt 4 months from today. We don't always agree, and honestly, none of the Democratic amendments were adopted, but it was a civil debate about the merits of policy. I believe all of our committee members recognize that the legislation that comes out of our committee has the potential to support wealth creation, grow small businesses, support affordable housing, and build a stable financial system and economy. It is the contrast with the intentionality and seriousness of the debate today that makes it so hard to understand why the very first piece of legislation to come to the floor under a rule is not a proposal to address the needs of any of our constituents, to provide support to struggling businesses or community banks and credit unions that finance them. And it certainly doesn't provide our markets with certainty that our country won't act recklessly and default on its debts, a situation that will bring untold harm to all of us in America. No, Mr. Speaker, this resolution today, in fact, does nothing except spread lies and fear about a threat that doesn't even exist. The right-wing extremists who are running this House have forced my committee to consider as its very first piece of legislation a bill that tries to say that our country will collapse in ruin because of, wait, for what? Social Security? The resolution suggests that because we support seniors with health insurance, our democracy will crumble. They think that because Congress and the President have provided disaster relief to communities that have been burned by historic wildfires or flooded by once-in-a-generation hurricanes, that we will fall into ruin. No, Mr. Speaker, Americans take pride in the ways that we come together to do everything from building schools to sending a man to the moon. Mr. Speaker, Americans know better than the fear-mongering we see here today. They know, for example, that when the pandemic hit and people were dying all across this country, it was the federal government that stepped in to provide trillions of dollars of support to small businesses, workers, renters, students, seniors, and would you believe it, even Republican members of Congress. In fact, the government, using taxpayer dollars, provided $14 million in PPP loans to a number of our House Republicans who asked and then, guess what, received debt forgiveness. Now, some Republicans have tried to suggest that voting against this resolution is saying that you support dictators like Pol Pot, Mao Zedong, or Stalin, which is ridiculous. No one in this chamber supports them, but do you know which dictator my extremist colleagues refuse to condemn? Oh, they didn't say anything about Hitler. Mr. Speaker, you've heard of him, right? My colleague, Mr. Gottheimer, noticed that somehow the Republicans just forgot to condemn Hitler and offered an amendment to denounce his atrocities and mass murder. But Republicans rejected it. And I think we know why. It's because Donald Trump, your true leader of the Republicans, and North Star for House Republicans, was reported to have frightened his own staff by saying that Hitler had done some good things. There's only one would-be authoritarian who refused to accept the will of our voters and peacefully transfer power after losing his election. Instead, he incited a violent insurrection on January 6th to block the election certification that was happening in this very chamber. But you won't see his name in this resolution, or his strongman pals that he loves so much, Russia and China. Mr. Speaker, we're a great nation not because we let everyone fend for themselves, but because we care for one another. We're a great nation that comes together as communities as small as towns and as large as a whole nation to decide to organize and collectively pay for fire departments, public schools, libraries, hospitals, roads and bridges, and a military. We are a better nation because we have programs that we love. We love Social Security and Medicare, and we're going to fight every inch of the way to ensure that we keep Social Security and Medicare. We're not going to let the opposite side of the aisle take away our seniors' Social Security and Medicare. I'll say it again, Social Security and Medicare. We are a better nation because our form of capitalism includes regulatory safeguards and strong cops on the beat patrolling our financial system, like the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Mr. Speaker, I urge you and the majority to stop this divisive gotcha tactics. Get out of the way and let my committee and this Congress pass real legislation that puts the needs of our constituents and nations first. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman from California reserves the gentleman from North Carolina.
At this time, I'd like to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Little Rock, Arkansas, the Vice Chair of the Financial Services Committee, Mr. Hill.
The gentleman is recognized.
Well, I thank the Speaker. That sound you're hearing, America, is your alarm going off. It's Groundhog Day. And I feel like Bill Murray because, Mr. Speaker, when the alarm goes off every morning, the ranking member of the House Financial Services Committee is off on a rant about the former president. So I think it's important that we stay focused on what we're talking about today. And it's a choice between freedom and something far worse. And the American people know why we're on this floor today. We are on this floor today to support a resolution that denounces socialism. As a boy attending elementary school in Little Rock, one of my favorite teachers was a beautiful young mother who taught us Spanish, and her kids were the playmates of mine during those early school years. Her family had moved to Little Rock, escaping the Castro regime in Cuba that murdered their fellow citizens and took family farms and businesses and systematically destroyed one of the most beautiful, successful countries and places on earth. For me, an early lesson in the cost of freedom. As a businessman in 1986, at the height of the Cold War, I joined a civil society tour of East Berlin, led by the U.S. Army via the famous checkpoint Charlie. There one saw the stark, cruel contrast of freedom versus socialism and communism. Vibrant businesses, full shelves, full employment in the West, and drab, sullen people in the East staring into empty store windows in buildings still bearing the bombs and bullet scars from World War II. Just 3.5 years later, with the fall of the Berlin Wall, I represented President George H.W. Bush as his Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Treasury in helping design and deliver U.S. economic and technical assistance to the citizens of the newly freed countries from socialism and communism, from the Baltic to the Black Sea, creating a rule of law, markets, private property rights, and new banking services. And Mr. Speaker, I keep a piece of that Berlin Wall in my house office. It reminds me of the gruesome fact that the Berlin Wall was built to keep people in, not the other way around, and keep freedom out. Today, some 3 decades later, one can witness the victory of capitalism and freedom over the authoritarianism and command and control of socialism. People of today's Central Europe want no part of communism or socialism. They know fully the brutality and failure of Soviet-style authoritarian socialist domination. So much so they've opened their homes to Ukrainian mothers and kids, opened their wallets to provide Ukrainians money, military, and humanitarian assistance to expel the invading Russians. Mr. Speaker, let's say no to socialism and yes to freedom and opportunity. And I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from North Carolina reserves, and the gentlewoman from California is recognized.
I now yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Velasquez.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Ranking Member. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in opposition to this resolution. I think it is important that we clarify what my colleagues on the other side of the aisle believe to be socialist policies. Historically, Republicans have tried to label as socialist any democratic actions that improve the lives of Americans. In 1996, Senator Bob Dole, the future Republican presidential nominee, referred to public housing as one of the last bastions of socialism and called for an end to government-assisted housing programs. Public housing in the United States provides decent and safe housing to 1.3 million families that are working class, elderly, or disabled. This is what Republicans call socialism. The 12-point plan to rescue America that Senate Republicans released last year vowed to stop socialism and shrink the federal government by enacting extreme policies like putting Social Security and Medicare on the chopping block. Former House Speaker Newt Gingrich promised that Medicare will wither on the vine thanks to spending cuts to combat what Mr. Gingrich dubbed big government socialism. Social Security and Medicare are hard-earned benefits that provides millions of seniors with health care and retirement funds every year. This is what Republicans call socialism. From climate action and public education to affordable care and Social Security, Republicans classify popular government programs to help working families as socialism. This resolution is a distraction from extremists and nothing more than a thinly veiled scare tactic directed toward voters. Why is it, Mr. Speaker, that we are here wasting our time discussing a resolution about socialism? Guess what? Work on the budget. That's what you need to do. And you refuse to work on the budget because you will have to tell the American people that you intend to cut benefits for Social Security and Medicare. I yield back.
Members are reminded to direct your remarks to the chair. Ladies from California reserves, the gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
At this time, I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, the chair of the Small Business Committee, and an advocate for capitalism, Mr. Roger Williams.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Speaker, let me ask you this. Are we capitalists or are we socialists? I'm glad to join my colleagues in denouncing socialism in all forms. Socialism is the greatest threat to our economy and freedom and must be defeated. Worldwide, socialism has led to the death of more than 100 million people, has forced thousands to flee in exile, and has turned prosperous nations into impoverished and hopeless nations. Socialism is not winning in America and has no place in our country. We are a nation of opportunity and incentive, and because of those principles, we are a nation of hope where everyone can benefit. What sets America apart from the rest of the world is the drive to reach our fullest potential, coupled with a free market economy. It is what makes us the greatest economic engine in the world. The opposite of socialism is capitalism, and I'm proud to call myself a capitalist. Capitalism is about taking responsibility for what you create and making it even greater. It's about going from nothing to going to something. It's about taking risk and getting rewards, not government handouts or freebies. Capitalism is the greatest force in the history of our world for lifting people out of poverty, and we must install this value that we have in future generations. As a small business owner for 52 years, I represent Main Street America, and let me tell you, the implications of what socialism would mean for our businesses is alarming and scary. Main Street was built by men and women who wanted to swing for the fences, because at the end of the day, there is a desire to dream bigger and to dream bolder, to turn dreams into visions and visions into reality. America must always lead the fight against socialism and communism. We must always defend and protect the principles of the American dream and ensure our future generations have the same opportunities to build something for themselves. We must never forget the tragedies socialism has caused for countries around the world, and I urge my colleagues, everybody, to support this resolution, denouncing the horrors of socialism and opposing the implementation of socialistic policies in the United States of America. Bottom line, socialism bad, capitalism good. In God we trust. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from North Carolina reserves. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Williams is my friend, but I do wonder whether Mr. Williams views the $1.43 million he received in debt forgiveness was consistent with his views on socialism. I don't get it. Now I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Doggett.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
I was prepared to vote for this resolution. Socialism is clearly not the best path for America, and who wants to be associated with Stalin and the others that this resolution denounces? Really thugs that were masquerading as socialists. But when the promoters of this worthless resolution rejected the Takano Amendment to protect Social Security and Medicare, their goal became clear. They have a long history of rigorously attacking most every new social initiative, originally claiming that Social Security would enslave workers and Sovietize the country. And they've long denounced Medicare as socialism. Some Republicans would even privatize the Veterans Administration with its socialist structure of government-run hospitals and employees. It's the system our veterans love. This resolution is the foundation for continued attacks on better Medicare for more Americans and their attempt to cut Social Security benefits. And like their cult leader, Donald Trump, they use this resolution to attack our allies, Germany and Sweden, at the very time they are considering cutting aid to Ukraine. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentlewoman from California reserves. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
At this time, I'd like to yield 90 seconds to the gentleman from... I'd like to not do that. Actually, we'd like to yield 90 seconds to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Muser. We're doing it live, folks. We're doing it live.
The gentleman is recognized for 90 seconds.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I thank our chairman very, very much for his leadership on what is a very important subject. I rise today, Mr. Speaker, to support this simple yet necessary resolution to denounce the inevitable corruption of socialism and the suffering and destruction it has brought upon hundreds of millions of people throughout the world since its inception. Our founding fathers built our nation on the principles of freedom, liberty, which leads to a free market economy, and all tenets that stand in directly counter to the ideas and ideals of socialism. Capitalism has produced prosperity for generations of Americans and shaped the American dream that so many have sought when immigrating to America for centuries. How many, Mr. Speaker, are fleeing capitalist countries like the United States to socialist countries, I ask you? Overtaxed economies backfire. They have no growth, prosperity, or quality of life advancements in medicine, food, housing, or honest education. Overregulation stifles business throughout a national and global market. And on the state side, gives states like Florida and Texas, and good for them, a great advantage over overregulated and overtaxed states. Historically, obvious metrics and clear results prove capitalism is far better for all societies, especially the United States of America. As President Reagan said, socialism only works in two places: heaven, where they don't need it, and hell, where they already have it. Socialist governments culminate with absolute power, and absolute power corrupts absolute.
Gentleman, time has expired. The gentleman from North Carolina reserves. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
I now yield 1 minute to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Meeks.
The gentleman is recognized.
I do not take this issue lightly. I do, however, take issue with how this resolution has been presented. Of course, we oppose the violence inflicted upon people under the rule of communist and dictatorial governments. But this resolution is less about their plight and more of a political stunt. Make no mistake about it. I am a proud capitalist, and I always will be. But ideas like affordable health care, affordable housing, and paid family leave are not radical socialist policies. Some of our closest allies in Europe and around the world participate in the free market and help their citizens meet their most basic needs. And that's what we've been sent here to do, to consider, debate, and ultimately pass legislation that will help the American people. So I ask my Republican colleagues, what is your agenda? Is it the 30% sales tax? Is it the cuts to Medicare and Medicaid? Is it the cuts to Social Security or eliminating access to reproductive care? What's your plan? Do we give people access so they can participate in the capitalist society, or do we just cut them so we can only limit the opportunity to participate in a capitalist society? I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman, time has expired. The gentlewoman from California reserves. The gentleman.
At this time, I'd like to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's often said that socialism is sharing and capitalism is selfishness, but it's precisely the opposite. The only way to prosper in a capitalist society is to identify what somebody else needs and to provide it for them better than they can provide it for themselves, whether it's sweeping a floor or designing a microchip. Socialism is taking what one person has earned by helping others and giving it to someone who hasn't. Socialism always produces poverty and misery because when you take $1 from Peter and give it to Paul, both have been robbed of that dollar's incentive to help each other. Peter's been denied the reward of his dollar's worth of work, and Paul no longer needs to help someone to earn that dollar. Socialism and slavery spring from exactly the same rotten principle as Lincoln put it, that you work and toil and make bread, and I will eat it. And both have been championed by the same party through the ages. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from North Carolina reserves. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
I now yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from Georgia, Ms. Williams.
The gentlewoman from Georgia is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, as a legislator, I know to look at a bill's definitions. As House Republicans talk about rejecting socialism in all its forms, it's important to understand just exactly what my Republican colleagues are talking about. Surely it's not Social Security and Medicare. Public schools, public libraries, public safety, roads and bridges. The bill doesn't say. There's not a single definition of socialism or all its forms. My colleague, Congressman Takano, gave my Republican colleagues an opportunity to clarify. He offered an amendment stating that programs like Social Security and Medicare are not socialism. Republicans have refused that amendment. That makes me wonder if what Republicans are really doing here is trying to reject things like bedrock social programs that so many of our seniors and constituents rely on. I support our nation's market-based economy, and if my Republican colleagues truly did the same, they would be using this time for legislation that creates jobs and lowers costs for all American families. This bill does neither, and I urge my Republican colleagues to focus their time on the issues that will help all of our constituents achieve the promise of America.
Gentleman's time has expired.
I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. The gentlewoman from California reserves. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Well, at this time, I'd like to yield 90 seconds to member of the Financial Services Committee, great leader for West Virginia, Mr. Mooney.
The gentleman from West Virginia is recognized for 90 seconds.
I rise today in support of Representative Maria Salazar's House resolution denouncing the horrors of socialism. I grew up in a home where the American ideals of personal freedom and limited government were cherished. My mother, Lala Suarez, grew up on a sugarcane farm in Cuba, where she was one of 14 brothers and sisters. When Fidel Castro took control of Cuba by force, her entire world was destroyed. My mother was imprisoned by Fidel Castro for 7 weeks. Thankfully, they never found the gun she'd hidden, or they would have executed her and her friends. She fled communism to enjoy freedom and opportunity in America. Today, over 60 years later, socialist policies have kept Cuba in economic ruin. She met my father, Vincent Mooney, became a proud American citizen. My father was a captain in the United States Army who served in Vietnam to stop the advance of communism. Growing up, my parents impressed upon me and my 3 siblings that America is special. Unlike economically failing socialist countries, Americans' personal liberties enshrined in our Constitution and must always be protected. All citizens deserve basic freedoms: freedom of press, freedom of speech, the right to vote, the right to be considered innocent till proven guilty, where in communist countries you're guilty till you prove yourself innocent, the right to worship. As President Donald Trump said right here in this chamber in his State of the Union speech, quote, "America will never be a socialist country," close quotes. America must never give up on our God-given rights. We must fight against socialism and for the American dream. And when government takes away your rights and freedoms, like the socialist and communist countries want to do, they never give them back. Every American should feel blessed to be born in this country where we're free. Let's protect our freedoms. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from North Carolina reserves. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I now yield 1 minute to the gentleman from California, Mr. Takano.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, this resolution is not about socialism. It is about political cynicism. No one in this chamber would defend the atrocities committed by murderous communist ideologues such as Mao Zedong or Fidel Castro. But that is not what this resolution is about. This resolution is about conflating some of our most cherished social safety net programs with so-called socialism. With this resolution, Republicans demonize Social Security, on which more than 46 million retirees rely today. Republicans demonize Medicare, which has saved the lives of countless Americans. And Republicans demonize many other federal programs, including benefits offered to our nation's veterans. Harry Truman was right when he said, "Socialism is a scare word that Republicans have hurled at every advance people have made in the last 20 years." I strongly urge my colleagues to oppose this resolution. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentlewoman from California reserves. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
This time I'd like to yield a minute to a great leader for agriculture issues from Tennessee, member of the Financial Services Committee, Mr. Rose.
The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, today I rise in support of House Concurrent Resolution 9, which denounces the horrors of socialism in all its forms. Because whether it's communism, Marxism, Leninism, Stalinism, Maoism, anarchism, democratic socialism, eco-socialism, or liberal socialism, all of these have failed. And none of these ideologies should, and God willing, will ever be implemented in the United States. By passing this resolution, we can send a message to the American people that we reject these deadly ideologies, and our nation will always and forever be a bastion of freedom and a beacon of hope. I pray for the more than 100 million lives that have been lost at the hands of communist regimes, totalitarian rule, and brutal dictatorships. Socialism should never play any part in the American way of life. I hope we can all agree on this common sense resolution, and I urge my colleagues to vote yes on its passage. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from North Carolina reserves. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
I now yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Wisconsin's Mr. Pocan.
The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, for 35 years now, I've owned a small business, giving me significantly more experience as a capitalist than the vast majority of members on the other side of the aisle. So as a capitalist, let me tell you, this resolution is plain ridiculous. It jointly condemns Pol Pot and Norway. I'm with you on the first one, but Norway, please. Here's what this is really about. More and more members on the other side of the aisle are calling for cuts to Social Security and Medicare, and many have referred to these programs as socialism throughout their existence. The other night in the Rules Committee, they showed their cards. Republicans refused an amendment to declare that Social Security and Medicare is not socialism. This resolution is little about intelligent discourse and everything to do about laying the groundwork to cut Social Security and Medicare. I support Social Security and Medicare, and capitalism, and Norway, and I'll be voting no. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentlewoman from California reserves. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
At this time, I'd like to yield 90 seconds to the chair of the Housing and Insurance Subcommittee, the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Davidson.
The gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 90 seconds.
I thank the chairman. I enlisted in the United States Army after high school and arrived in West Germany in the spring of 1989. The Cold War was at fever pitch, and at the Brandenburg Gate, President Reagan had famously said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." On 9 November 1989, the East German people finally tore down their own wall. Not Gorbachev, not America, not the West, but the people trapped on the other side of that wall. I was there that Thanksgiving in the heart of Berlin when I met with people experiencing their first hours of freedom. One man asked me, "Is it like this everywhere?" And I thought he meant like Berlin, a big city. I'm from Western Ohio in a small town. He corrected me. He said, "No, the stores are open at night and there's fresh milk and everyone can go in." He had been told the lie that we were poorer on the West than they were, that only the elites could buy things, like the Communist Party officials. He was not alone. You see, the wall had separated their communists from our freedom and free markets. The flood of people was to the land of opportunity, not to the failed ideas of Marx and Lenin. The United States of America is worth saving, and to do that, we must defend freedom and defeat socialism. I yield back.
Yields back. The gentleman from North Carolina reserves, and the gentlewoman from California is recognized.
I now yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Frost.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in opposition of this resolution because the American people know that the biggest threat to our modern democratic society and free market economy is not some socialist boogeyman, it's Republican leaders in this chamber. People who want to call every federally funded program that Americans depend on socialism just to scare people and position themselves to cut and gut the benefits that people count on. Go back and look at the decades worth of transcripts and see what Republicans call socialism to scare people. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the Affordable Care Act. They even call free public school education socialism to scare people. This vote is a sham. We've heard about Cuba a ton. My mother came here from Cuba in the late 1960s with my grandmother, my aunt, and I won't let their story be used to gut the benefits that our people have earned and deserve. This vote has nothing to do with socialism and everything to do with gutting the programs that millions of Americans have paid into and have earned. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentlewoman from California reserves. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
At this time, I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Flood, for 90 seconds.
The gentleman from Nebraska is recognized for 90 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise today in strong support of this resolution condemning socialism. I have seen the victims of socialism firsthand. Many of those victims have found refuge in Nebraska. Vietnamese is the third most spoken language in Nebraska due to immigration in the 1970s. And members of the Falun Gong have found freedom from religious persecution by the Chinese Communist Party in our great state. History shows us that when socialism is tried, it leads to three things: poverty, devastation, and ultimately communism. As Vladimir Lenin once said, quote, "The goal of socialism is communism," end quote. And socialist regimes continue to commit atrocities around the world. In North Korea, there's an estimated 180,000 prisoners today. Many of them are subjected to torture and extreme manual labor. In Venezuela, police and security forces killed more than 19,000 people between 2016 and 2019 for quote-unquote resisting authority. In Cuba, journalists, bloggers, and artists are routinely jailed for speaking against the regime. The list goes on and on. Socialism is the enemy, not just to free enterprise, but human rights. I urge my colleagues to support this resolution. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from North Carolina reserves, and the gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The last speaker, the gentleman mentioned China, and I'd like to just remind everyone of a quote by their President Trump. And I like President Xi a lot. He said, "I consider him a friend, and I like him a lot. I've gotten to know him very well. He's a strong gentleman, right? He's a strong guy, tough guy." So, when are you going to denounce Trump? Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Wasserman Schultz.
The gentlewoman from Florida is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to condemn all socialist autocrats who place power and wealth over their own citizens. Yet this resolution ignores some of their worst evils, then falls silent while American leaders mimic their cruel tactics. For instance, Cubans and Venezuelans suffer from far worse than the inflation and expropriation this measure describes. Dictators there destroy human rights, the rule of law, and jail, exile, or kill their enemies. Let's condemn socialist abuses, yes, but leaders on this very floor seek to overturn democratic elections, confiscate long-held rights, and gut programs our families, veterans, and service members need. In my home state, an aspiring autocrat daily deploys the socialist tyrant's playbook. He marginalizes minorities, demonizes the free press, and criminalizes or bans speech, books, even history. What we can learn from these failed despots is to respect the rule of law, free speech, and free elections, and to protect our own citizens from the grinding poverty tyrants wield as weapons. Socialist dictators deserve our scorn, but glossing over their crimes and ignoring the leaders right here who mimic them, that fails those fighting freedom everywhere. Thank you. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman yields back. The gentlewoman from California reserves. The gentleman from North Carolina.
If I may inquire the time remaining on both sides.
The gentleman from North Carolina has 15 and a half minutes.
And may I inquire about the...
From California has 15 quarter.
All right. This time I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from California, Ms. Kim.
The gentlewoman from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman McHenry, and I would thank you for yielding your time. I rise in strong support of House Concurrent Resolution 9 to denounce the atrocities perpetuated by socialism across the world. If you want to see the difference between socialism and freedom, take a look at North Korea at night versus South Korea. As an immigrant who grew up in South Korea during the aftermath of the Korean War, I know firsthand the horror, the destruction, that socialism has brought to millions of families in the Korean Peninsula under the evil regime of Kim dynasty, from Kim Il-sung to Kim Jong-il to now Kim Jong-un. Socialism divided my family and friends between North and South. My mother-in-law, for example, she crossed over DMZ and back multiple times to rescue loved ones from the tyrannical North Korean regime, and tens of thousands of war-torn families remain separated to this day. Meanwhile, famines and the daily threats of a nuclear war in East Asia persist. Although I was just a young girl, I remember the hope embodied by those brave soldiers who defended the freedoms of a country they never knew and a people they never met. It is because of them that I stand before you today as one of the first Korean-American women to serve in Congress. The United States must continue to stand as a beacon of freedom, hope, and opportunity for the world. I urge my colleagues from both sides of the aisle to join us to say no to socialism, and I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. The gentleman from North Carolina reserves, and the gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The gentlelady from California just mentioned North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. And let me tell you what Trump said. He said, Kim wrote me beautiful letters, and they're great letters. We fell in love. Now I yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from New Mexico, Ms. Ledger Fernandez.
The gentlewoman from New Mexico has been recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I absolutely denounce the brutal and communist regimes of Castro, Maduro, Stalin, and other dictators in the whereas clauses of this resolution. But sadly, instead of spending our precious moments in the people's house, expanding opportunity for hardworking Americans, supporting ranchers, farmers, and rural communities, lowering health care costs, and strengthening Social Security and Medicare, we are spending hours, actually days, in pure political theater. In the Rules Committee, when I offered Mr. Takano's amendment to clarify that this resolution does not also condemn Social Security, Medicare, and veterans' health benefits, Republicans blocked it. Yet I know still that our love and respect for our veterans, seniors, and retirees will always guide our work to ensure they receive all the benefits they've earned. I will not stray from our obligation to create prosperity, hope, and a future everywhere in America. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. The gentlewoman from California reserves, and the gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
At this time, I'd like to recognize a great new member of the Financial Services Committee, the gentleman from Hudson Valley, Mr. Lawler, for 2 minutes.
The gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As Margaret Thatcher said, the problem with socialism is that eventually you run out of other people's money. Now, my wife is an immigrant from Eastern Europe, from Moldova, a former Soviet satellite state. She came to this country in search of economic opportunity and freedom and a better life for her and her family. She left a former communist country that is still dealing with the grips of communism and socialist policies. Let's be very clear. Communism and socialism have limited freedoms, stymied economic innovation and opportunity, and limited prosperity, and left the very people it claims to help in a permanent state of poverty and government dependence. Conversely, capitalism has lifted people from poverty to prosperity within a generation and made America the envy of the world. To be clear, this resolution is not about Social Security or Medicare, two programs with broad bipartisan support. It is about a sick ideology that has destroyed nations, ruined lives, and resulted in death and destruction around the world. Now, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are twisting themselves into knots, trying to explain why they oppose this resolution. The sad truth is, it's because their party has been taken over by a radical socialist ideology that they are held hostage to. They can't even muster the courage to denounce it. We are Americans. We should speak with one voice and denounce socialism, communism, dictators, and despots at every turn. I'm proud to support this resolution to denounce socialism and proudly embrace capitalism, American innovation.
The gentleman should be yielded another minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm proud to support this resolution, denounce socialism, and proudly embrace capitalism, American innovation and ingenuity, and the role it has played in promoting freedom and democracy throughout the rest of the world. And I ask all of my colleagues to join me. It's very simple. This is not about Social Security or Medicare. This is about denouncing socialism. And if you can't muster the strength to do that, that speaks volumes about your party. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. Gentleman from North Carolina reserves.
Mr. Speaker and members, I want to reiterate, I love
the members
I love Social Security. I love Medicare. And so now I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Maryland, the former leader, Mr. Hoyer.
Thank you. The chair would like to remind members that they need to direct their remarks to the chair. And the gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to lament the failure today to consider a resolution which would reflect the overwhelming consensus in this House that capitalism, not socialism, has proven to be the very best economic system. It is the most effective system to create dynamic economies and incentivize individual innovation, entrepreneurship, and risk-taking to achieve economic security and success. Such a resolution would have brought us together. It would give confidence to our fellow citizens that we are united in our support of our democratic capitalist system. The resolution before us today, however, does not do that. Instead, it is an intellectually bankrupt screed of political demagoguery. All it aims to do is to divide, to distract this institution and this country. It is a political gotcha and a distraction from the real issues that face the American people. As our departed colleague Elijah Cummings said, we're better than this. We just came from an annual prayer breakfast where we gave voice to reconciliation and unity. We prayed to one God and we recited our pledge to one nation, under God, indivisible. This resolution seeks to divide. America expects more of us. This resolution does not, sadly, Mr. Speaker, further that goal. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlewoman from California reserves. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
2 minutes. The gentleman from Tennessee, my friend, Mr. Burchett.
The gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Speaker, I appreciate you and I appreciate your service to our great country. I rise today in support of condemning the horrors of socialism. The biggest crimes in humanity have happened under socialist regime. It's taken more than 100 million lives. Margaret Thatcher said it best, and I'll paraphrase it, eventually you run out of people to take money from. That's the only way socialism works. President Trump said we would never be a socialist country in his State of the Union address, and I was shocked. I was shocked that over half of this body, Mr. Speaker, refused to stand and applaud that. Over half. I think it tells where we are as a country. Too many people have fought and died for this country. If you ever come to my Knoxville office, there's a 48-star flag that's on the wall, and it's a flag that was draped over my uncle's casket. He was too old to go fight, Mr. Speaker. He went and enlisted anyway. They sent him home back to Cheatham County. He went back and enlisted again. They let him go. He died shortly after the D-Day invasion as a sergeant. Too old to go to fight, but he went anyway. He fought for the American dream. He fought for what we have in this country, and every dadgum day we want to throw it away. The fact that we are even having this conversation sickens me, Mr. Speaker. I say that with all sincerity, and I thank you.
Back, the gentleman from North Carolina reserves. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Again, quoting the ex-president who still thinks he's president. He said, I went in yesterday and there was a television screen and I said, this is genius. Putin declares a big portion of the Ukraine. Putin declares it as independent. Oh, that's wonderful. He used the word independent, and we're going to go out and we're going to go in and we're going to help keep peace. You got to say that's pretty savvy. Anyhow, I now yield 1 minute to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler, who is the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee.
1 minute.
I thank the gentlelady. This resolution lists many communist dictators, but it doesn't list any of the capitalist dictators, from Hitler to Mussolini to Franco to Salazar to Perón and so many more, because tyranny, the issue is not socialism, the issue is tyranny. But the second issue is the progress of the American people, because every single issue of progress, from Medicare to Medicaid to the Affordable Care Act to public housing to Social Security, has been called by Republican leaders at the time socialist. This is not an attack on tyranny. This is an attack on all of these programs. This is an attack on Medicare, on Social Security, on public housing, on federal aid to education, on everything the Republicans have called socialist when they were first enacted, and they still want to get rid of. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentlewoman from California reserves. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I've heard the most absurd argument just now on the House floor. The contents of this resolution are very simple, very straightforward. A system that is born out of freedom inevitably begets freedom and the liberation of people from tyranny. An economic system that is born out of taking inevitably leads to the loss of human life and centralization and control by despotic people. That's what this resolution speaks to. It does not speak to any programs here in the United States, doesn't talk about our system of government, doesn't speak of other systems, economic systems. It is simply in the resolved that Congress denounces socialism in all its forms and opposes the implementation of socialist policies in the United States, period. So rather than contorting yourselves to vote no against a resolution condemning tyrants that use socialism to centralize their power, they've contorted themselves, my colleagues are contorting themselves to speak against previous president, or a question of Republicans' views on domestic social programs. It's not a part of this resolution. It's a part of other debates everywhere else in Congress, but let's read the resolution. Let's stick to the terms of debate of the resolution, and let's figure out a way that we can actually come together and denounce socialism in all its forms here in the United States. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from North Carolina reserves. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
I now yield 1 minute to the gentleman from California, Mr. Khanna.
That was 1 minute, ma'am.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me be clear. The Democratic Party does not believe that the government should control the means of production. No Democrat believes that there should be government gas stations or government technology companies or government car companies. So what does the Democratic Party believe? We believe every person in America should have child care. And what is the Republicans? What do they say? Their answer, well, look at how many people Stalin killed. We say, let's give everyone health care. The Republicans say, well, we can't do that. Look at how many people Pol Pot killed. We say, let's make sure everyone has equal opportunity. The Republican plan, we can't do that. Look at how many people Kim Jong-un is starving. You know, give me a break. The American people are catching on. They know that we have lost 25% of wealth in the working class and middle class since 1980. They know that the real crime are not crimes happening abroad, but the crime of paying starvation wages for hard work. This party is actually solving the problems of the American people. That party is giving rhetoric about foreign regimes. People will see through the rhetoric and side with the Democratic Party.
The gentleman yields back. The gentlewoman from California reserves. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
I have one further speaker. I inquire from the other side how many more speakers they have.
Mr. Speaker, I have several speakers left.
Several speakers.
I reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
May I inquire, how much time do we have left?
The gentlewoman has 7 1/4 minutes.
7 1/4 minutes. Thank you.
Can you read this? Let me share.
No. No.
We don't have a speaker right now.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to share a quote from the opposite side of the aisle. Socialism is a scare word that they have hurled at every advance that people have made in the last 20 years. They go on to say socialism is what they call public power. Socialism is what they call Social Security. Socialism is what they call farm price supports. Socialism is what they call bank deposit insurance. Socialism is what they call the growth of free and independent labor organizations. Socialism is their name for almost anything that helps all people. This was a quote from the great President Truman talking about Republican claims 70 years ago. It's revisited itself. I now yield 2.5 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. Sherman, who is also the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Capital Markets.
How many minutes did she say? The gentleman is recognized for 2.5 minutes. I'm not hearing her at all when she tells us.
Yes, we do. Good. Will you be, oh, do I take them off or do you take them off? Either way. You want to? Oh, well, I'll signal you and stand here. Okay, well, I'll do it then. Imagine an anti-socialist resolution so poorly drafted that the co-chair of the CPA caucus finds it necessary to come here and denounce it. But this resolution equates Willy Brandt with Kim Jong-un, Medicare with the Great Leap Forward, and European socialists, allies of America and NATO, with the worst murderers in history. Democracy calls for every country to decide what blend of government regulation of business, what blend of government programs to have, and that is a decision for each country to make. Instead, we have a resolution that it provides a misleading and sophomoric description of history. We are told that all socialism is equal and that Marxist-Leninism is the same as the European socialists. When communism stood over Europe and could have conquered the Western world, we organized NATO. Here are the NATO leaders who were all socialists: Harold Wilson, Willy Brandt, Francois Mitterrand, and so many others. Without them, Stalinism may well have prevailed. Yet this resolution condemns them. And then we are told, oh, well then, if the anti-communists must be great people. Yes, like Francisco Franco and the rest of those identified on this chart. Now, later today, the Republican leadership wants to take someone off her committees because they say they're dedicated to anti-Semitism. Yet on the same day, they bring a resolution to this floor that equates some of the greatest leaders of Israel with some of the greatest mass murderers of history. Look at the history of Israel. The founder of Israel, Ben-Gurion, a socialist. Golda Meir, member of the Socialist International. And Shimon Peres, president of Israel and president of the Socialist International. Yet, they say they're against anti-Semitism. 73% of the American people believe that Republican leadership is ignoring the important problems facing America, and we could dismiss this resolution as just a stupid waste of time, consistent with that ignoring. But the fact is, it's not.
Can
I get another 30 seconds?
Gentleman, time has expired.
Yield an extra 15 seconds to the gentleman.
Gentleman, an additional 15 seconds as well.
Thank you.
Gentleman is recognized for 30 seconds.
They're intent on using the debt limit to attack Social Security, which was attacked by Republicans as socialist at the time and by Paul Ryan more recently. They're here to attack Medicare as socialist, as was done by Ronald Reagan in a whole LP album denouncing Medicare as socialism. They're here with this resolution to say that any social program can be equated with the greatest mass murderers in history. This resolution is not just a waste of time. It is a pernicious attack on the programs that American people support. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlewoman from California reserves, and the gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I want to just take a moment and thank my colleague for his fulsome defense of socialism and historical socialists. I think that was the most intellectually honest piece of debate we've had here on the House floor. And if this resolution would just simply draw out my Democrat colleagues to just say, yes, they're in favor of socialism, maybe this is a worthwhile endeavor. Again, this is not my resolution. It was reported to my committee. We're reporting out this resolution as Mrs. Salazar of Florida presented and wrote because this was the early stages of the House. This came straight to the House floor rather than through the committee markup. It came through the Rules Committee. What I would have preferred in this resolution was a fulsome defense of capitalism and the juxtaposition between that optimistic sense of freedom that is born out of our property rights, our speech rights, our individual liberties in this country that is deeply connected us with an economic system of freedom. And the juxtaposition of that to the misery of socialism. And what the taking of people's individual liberty and centralizing it in government and government control does to economic progress, to the best of humanity, what it does to social outcomes, to the health and welfare of the people, the economic prosperity of the people, and the misery that it begets to those people suffering in those regimes. But what we have here is a history of international moments of terror begat by Putin. It's not in there. He doesn't currently call himself a socialist. But Lenin did, Stalin did, Mao Zedong did, Fidel Castro did, and the list goes on. Then it talks about the loss of human life under those regimes from those socialist leaders. And then the resolve clause I've read before, that Congress denounces socialism in all of its forms and opposes the implementation of socialist policies in the United States of America. I would be happy to work with my colleague on the type of resolution that I outlined, happy to have that come back to the floor in time on something that my Democrat colleagues would actually support, a proper denunciation of the miseries of socialism and a proper embrace of our economic capitalism here in the United States. But that's not what we have before us today. So I'd encourage my colleagues to look what is in the resolution and judge it based off the contents of what's here, not what is omitted. And with that, I would reserve the balance of my time, and my colleague I'm going to yield to close. So we're prepared to close on this side.
The gentleman from North Carolina reserves, and the gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to raise a question, and I'll direct it to the Speaker. Was PPP socialism? No, of course not. But some Republicans would claim it was. And interestingly, many Republicans, including several sponsors of this ridiculous resolution, not only applied for a PP loan, but also asked that the government forgive the debt. So I ask unanimous consent to enter this list of Republicans into the record.
Without objection.
With that, I yield 1 minute.
There's an objection.
What did you say?
The gentleman, lady, may continue.
They objected to that.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself the balance of the time.
Gentlewoman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, Americans are tired of this body wasting. It's time when there are real problems to address. I want to get started considering legislation to house the more than 500,000 people who will sleep outside tonight because they don't have a house of their own. I want to get started on legislation to address the extreme wealth disparities in our country, including where CEOs now make almost 400 times what the average workers make. I want to stop Wells Fargo-like banks from ripping off millions of consumers. I want to get started finding ways for seniors and folks saving for their retirement to have more confidence that those who would defraud them will be thwarted. Instead, we spend time talking about how Republicans want to force Biden to slash Social Security and Medicare, or they will turn the economy down by forcing a default on our debts. But the American people should rest assured that I and my Democratic colleagues are united in our resolve to expand access to affordable housing, good-paying jobs, protect consumers from abuse, strengthen our economy, safeguard our national security, protect Social Security and Medicare, and above all, defend our democracy. Let me say it again, protect Social Security and Medicare. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman from California yields back. The gentleman from
Mr.
North
Speaker,
Carolina.
how much time do I have remaining?
4 3/4 minutes.
I'd like to yield the balance of my time to the Budget Committee Chairman, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Arrington, to close on behalf of Republicans.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized to close.
I thank my friend, the chairman from North Carolina. Socialism, like the devil, does not appear with horns and a pitchfork. He masquerades as an angel of light, with promises of human flourishing, all failed, all broken. Socialism isn't empty words. It isn't a speech. It's a series of actions that rob people of their freedom and concentrate power in the hands of a few in their central government. I heard my colleague say, socialism is controlling the means of production. We're not doing that, except that there's a whole of government assault for all the world to see on an industry, American energy, and it's being replaced with this Green New Deal, hundreds of billions of dollars in subsidies, tax credits, grants. If that's not the control of the means of production, I don't know what is. Universal health care. We don't want health care in the hands of doctors and patients. We want it in the hands of bureaucrats. We want government to control health care. Folks, masquerading as an angel of light is this concentration of power. Socialism is the road to serfdom, and history is littered with the failed experiment in central planning. Those countries that have taken that ruinous road have ruined, destroyed their country, and left their people in despair. Our founding fathers believed fundamentally this: if we limit the federal government's role in our lives, we'll unleash the greatest potential of free people created in the image of God. And they were right. There's never been a greater force for all of humanity than freedom. Nothing uplifts the human condition, unlocks the human potential, unleashes the human spirit like freedom. Freedom has given every generation of Americans the greatest opportunities, the highest standard of living, the best quality of life anywhere on the planet and in the history of the world. But in the prescient words of Ronald Reagan, freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same. God have mercy on our country. If you boil it down, Mr. Speaker, I believe our singular mission in this chamber, in this, our nation's capital, is to fight for our country by preserving and protecting freedom for the next generation of Americans. And if, like my colleagues say, that this is just theater, that decrying socialism, extolling the freedom and the virtues and value of freedom is theater, God give us more Shakespeare's. God bless America, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Pursuant to House Resolution 83, the previous question is ordered on the concurrent resolution and the preamble. The question is on the adoption of the current resolution. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The current resolution is agreed to.
Republicans, Mr. Speaker, on that I request the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote for the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed.